The podcast you are about to listen to is not a medical podcast, nor is it designed to diagnose a condition. While there are medical experts on the show, any questions regarding medical care or concern should be directed to a primary care physician.
The team at Imvax is dedicated to delivering new, personalized immunotherapy approaches to improve outcomes for people living with glioblastoma and other solid tumors. Leveraging decades of validated research and technologies, Imvax's unique platform is designed to capture a tumor's full antigen signature and use it to stimulate a patient's immune system against remaining tumor cells. Imvax, advancing a new approach to personalized cancer immunotherapy. Hey, it's your friend Shannon Traphagen, and welcome to the Game on Glio podcast. Here we tell the stories of brain cancer and tumor warriors, clinicians, medical experts, and those in the grief and loss community. Thanks to all of you for making our podcast one of the most popular podcasts globally. If you enjoy our show, please consider writing a review. Also share us with a friend and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and our website.
This episode of the Game on Glio podcast is sponsored by GT MedTech and GammaTile Therapy. Learn more at gtmedtech.com. Season 4 is also sponsored by Imvax, personalized whole tumor-derived immunotherapy. Learn more at imvax.com. This episode is brought to you by Imvax LLC. Learn more at imvax.com.
Famed author Elizabeth Gilbert once said, "You're allowed to ask yourself really important questions about your life. You're allowed to take accountability and ownership for your own journey." So here's the question, or should I say questions. What is it life is trying to teach you? What is it you need to learn from the hardships that life has brought to you? How can you start to take ownership of a journey that has befallen you but wasn't something you had control over? These are not easy questions, but they're vital ones. Instead of asking why something has happened, we must try to focus on the questions that will serve us in figuring out what is next. That is the key to surviving such loss and difficult times. Most journeys aren't figured out until our days end. Very few times in life can we sit back and say, that's what it was all about. More often than not, we're taking steps and learning as we go, but we never truly get the full picture. And maybe we're not meant to, but what we do with the time that we have and the willingness to learn from all parts of our journey mean more than getting the full picture. It's about taking ownership, allowing ourselves to walk through every stage of the journey. The grief, the sadness, the fear, the anxiety, the will to survive, the strength, the hope, the need to feel our heart again. We need to want to find our way back to the pieces of ourselves that we've lost. And that isn't always an easy thing to do once we've lost someone so crucial in our lives. Part of this includes learning to live independently again, alone, without. The questions above, they help us do just that. And it's these kinds of questions, this kind of thinking, that's part of our discussion today. The guests that we have coming on will help us navigate and walk through the difficult discussions of finance and the repercussions when it comes to estate planning, wills, how to survive financially after losing a spouse. It's a conversation that's long overdue and one that I wish I had had when Mike died. We sit down with Frank Randall and Dan Schlein of Alliance Advisory Group after a word from our sponsor.
Our time is precious, especially when you or your loved one is diagnosed with a brain tumor or the cancer has spread to the brain. That is why GammaTile is here, the only FDA-cleared bioabsorbable implant specifically designed for the brain that delivers immediate radiation at the time of brain tumor removal. No more waiting to start radiation. No more of your precious time spent going to outpatient radiation treatments. With GammaTile, focus on what truly matters: your recovery, your strength, and cherished moments with loved ones. Discover GammaTile centers near you and find hope from inspiring patient stories at GammaTile.com.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for listening and joining us today. We are doing something a little unique here on the Game on Glio podcast. We have decided that we really want to put some emphasis and focus on the financial side and the strain of what it means to go through different crises in life, different traumas in life, different experiences in life. We've all been there. We've all gone through it. Whether you're a caregiver, whether you're a patient, whether you're in the medical industry and you've started a new startup or a department or a center to focus on a very specific cancer, or you're a nurse in the profession, we've all come across those strains financially. So today we have with us Dan Schlein, who is a licensed financial advisor at Alliance Advisory Group out of Buffalo, New York. He coaches his clients through diligent and consistent financial planning. He focuses on proper savings, rational investing, and he puts an emphasis on business, individual, and family planning. We also have with us today Frank Randall, who is also a financial advisor with the Alliance Advisory Group out of Rochester, New York. He's also the founder of MedPro Financial. He serves the medical professional industry across the nation with a focus on risk management, investment strategies, personal and business planning. Welcome, you guys. Thank you so much for being here.
What an introduction. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Of course. So we are going to dive right in, and I want to throw this out to both of you. This is such a great topic to dive into because so many out there are going to have these kinds of questions. And Lord knows that I had these questions a few years ago and was inundated with navigating a very complex financial planning after Mike died. I want to talk to each of you regarding certain aspects of financial planning, especially given with things the way they are in the economy right now. You know, why is it important to access financial planning, both for the present moment, but also thinking about the future, given the current climate of our economy right now?
I guess when I look at the current climate of the economy as a whole, and we could spend hours and hours talking about what's going on in the world and all that kind of stuff and what it's leading to, but we don't have that much time today, so I'll cut to it. No matter the climate, I find that people sometimes just don't plan for some of this stuff, and they don't understand like what could happen as far as some of the risks that they're leaving on the table. Mm-hmm. I'll give an analogy. It's like a lot of people are getting in a financial car. Stick with me for a second. And they're driving fast without the seatbelts working, without the airbags being properly put in, without there actually being brakes on the car. What we like to look at is say, okay, what could actually get in the way of some of the stuff? How do we plan for it? How do we look at your goals, who you are, how you look at money? And really, no matter what the economic climate is, put you in the best position to drive that car in the safest and go the fastest you want. But a lot of people are trying to go fast without some of those other things being properly put in. So I'll kind of just caveat the whole conversation with the economy right now, coming up an election year and all these other things. Like they do have some different sways in the market as a whole, and interest rates going up and inflation, all this stuff. But no matter what the economy looks like, having a plan and understanding what could come and get in the way of a lot of it is very important.
That really definitely paints a picture.
Yeah, I think one thing to add to that I see is, Dan mentioned, it's an election year. That's when we're recording this. And one of the things that I find clients ask me, and I had a meeting with a client this past week, and they asked if we should make any changes because it's an election year, right? There's obviously concerns on that front. But the data suggests that the economy and the stock market, for example, doesn't care if the president's a Republican or Democrat. It's going to go up. It's going to go down. It's going to do whatever it's going to do. And so I always try to tell clients when we think about the economy and the stock market, you can overanalyze it until you're blue in the face, and you can try and time everything perfectly, but we really have to have a long time horizon. I don't necessarily care where the stock market's going to be next year. I care where it's going to be 20 years from now, right? When you think about really the big picture. The last thing I'll add is that I find that most clients like accessing our team because it's just one less thing they have to worry about.
How so?
Well, I'll say, personally, I'm married. I have 2 little kids, and we are so busy, and we will oftentimes, tap into other professionals to help us streamline things so that we can get our time back. When Dan and I take lead in that space for our clients, they don't have to worry about the nuances of, did I make the right investment? Did I buy the right stock? If we can just focus on the big picture, it really gives people that time back, which I think most of our clients appreciate.
Frank mentioned something about the goal with you guys is really to focus on, you're not worried about an election year. You're not worried about next year. You're worried about 20 years down the road. Whether it's, professionals in the business community that are dealing with investment strategy for their business or individual planning, how can you help people get into the habit of focusing down the road instead of short term? Because I can see that being a challenge for people, that they're worried about where their investments are going in the next couple of years, but aren't fully understanding why it's important to focus on 15 years down the road, 20 years down the road.
Really, what we see the most is people, of course, want to make decisions today, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, I got to buy that car. Hey, I'm in some debt. Hey, all these things are happening. And Frank and myself in our planning process shows that it is important to understand your todays. It is important to understand what has to be done and in what order and stuff. But not everything's tied for first. Understanding prioritization of what should be the right order and what should be first, what should be second, how to approach all this stuff. And once we have full clarity on what's the right approach, what's the right priority of what's one, 2, and 3, what we can do is, I'll just give a really simple overview of we can put different buckets in place so what's for the next couple years, what money is accessible to utilize and so on for those things, what money is maybe 5 to 10 years, 5 to 15 years out, and what money is for that longer term, 20 plus years, like you guys were mentioning. And I think that'll help understand what money is for what and what we can actually prioritize and what will be not only first, but second, third, fourth, fifth, et cetera. We can start to knock those out.
I have a question that I'm going to throw to Frank, but before I do that, I want to emphasize and mention too that Alliance Advisory Group as a whole is considered a fiduciary, correct?
Well, the entity itself, yeah. So the physical building itself isn't, but us as advisors are, correct?
Yes, that's what I mean. Can one of you guys just explain what that actually means?
In our world, there is, and people throw the word financial advisor around a lot. 50 years ago, that meant something specific. If you managed money, you were a money manager. If you sold life insurance, you were a life insurance salesman. Now, in our industry, there's the word financial advisor, planner, strategist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you don't really know exactly what that means because usually you just associate that with whatever experience you've had with that person. That being said, we look at the stuff holistically and we look at the stuff to put our clients first with their goals, understanding exactly how to methodically go through this process and show them not only how to make decisions today, but later. But to actually answer what a fiduciary is it means you have the obligation to put your clients first in every way, shape, or form and be able to prove, in the court of law sometimes, exactly why you made that recommendation, exactly why this is the best fit for them, and the conversations you had. Where are the notes? Where are all the conversations, goals, and situation to be able to holistically paint that picture?
So it holds you guys responsible. It makes you guys accountable to the clients that you're serving, in essence.
Correct.
Yeah, and one thing to add to that, when we talk about fiduciary duty and being a good financial advisor, a lot of it really comes down to behavior management for the clients. So a couple of years ago, Vanguard did a study, and it basically said that those who work with a financial advisor have better performance inside of their portfolio. And that's not because the advisor is picking better stocks. It's because the advisor is helping the client to stay grounded to the plan. It's helping them not to get scared or emotional or make illogical decisions. When we talk about what we really do, it's truly behavior management for clients because
interesting.
Many different types of strategy and stock plans, but I don't want to speak for Dan, but I know Dan's practiced pretty well in the same sense as, we're trying to coach clients on financial behavior. And I think of myself more like a financial therapist. That's not, a fiduciary term per se, but that's kind of how I think about it sometimes from a client standpoint.
That's fascinating. And I love that terminology because when you're talking about finances, when you're talking about money, in whatever setting that you're in, but especially for some of our listeners who are in that space of being a caregiver or having just been slapped with a massive diagnosis, and now your financial strategies are changing as well, even from the medical side, it is behavioral, it is emotional, and there's a lot of tie to that. And so trying to keep a sound mind and a sound plan, and to have somebody in your corner that's going to direct you and navigate you through all your journey in life and every direction that you go in. It's just a really great way to show what financial advisors really do and how seriously you guys take it. Frank, I want to jump over to you because you do some really interesting work in the medical community. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like? How do you serve the medical community from a financial planning perspective? Because you work with a lot of nurses and doctors, correct?
Yeah. So for some context, my wife is a nurse practitioner here at Strong in the trauma department. I started dating her back when she was a nurse. I've kind of seen her go through the sacrifices of the long overnights and like the weekend shifts as she was a nurse, 10 years ago. And I remember helping her study for her MP boards. And when I say study, I just read flashcards that she designed. Didn't do much more than that. But, I found myself surrounded by people in the medical space. I started to evolve my practice kind of like you would when you go to the doctor, right? So if you were coming in for a first time visit and maybe you have an ailment, right? Whether your stomach's hurting or in the financial terms, you want to save more money. Mm-hmm. The reality is we have to understand that as a practitioner, I need to do some digging and understand, okay, yes, you're complaining about one ailment, but let's really look at the whole body. Let's go put you through, an assessment, right? We want to assess the patient, use some of the tools that we have available. Mm-hmm. I think of it like a financial MRI that will help me diagnose things that you as the patient or client can see and can't see. And then sometimes when we get to the recommendation, I'll write a prescription that I can sometimes fill. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I have to go to other professionals, send out referrals. And, I've just always thought of my practice that way. And the last year or so, I kind of pivoted to work with practice owners. I'm a partner with the New York State Society of Physician Assistants. I've worked with the New Jersey Pharmacy Association, handful of different groups.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think the process is very similar when I'm interacting with a client. So long answer, but that's kind of what comes to mind from like a medical standpoint, personal and professionally.
I love your use of terminology because I work with a lot of neurodocs and I'm heavily embedded in the medical community. So the analogy works great because it paints a really good picture. In this space that you're talking about here, do you work with, any neuro-oncology doctors or nurses? And have you worked with anybody that's opened centers or institutes, kind of like in the brain tumor space right now? We have some great institutions that have specifically opened brain tumor centers so that they could really do their collaboration and their research, really focusing in that arena. Even for those that you're not working with, or if you're not in that space, what should partners be looking for? What questions should they be asking when they're looking at opening up these kind of practices? What can help them drive success and stability?
I know offhand, I can think of a handful of clients that are in the neuro space. My wife actually did a stint in the neuro ICU as well. But I think to answer the question about opening practice, some things to consider, I'd say the first thing would be is cash flow planning is really key. Dan and I are both business owners ourselves, right? And so when we think about cash flow is the engine, right, of the car that Dan was talking about before. And you're really understanding where cash flow is coming from, understanding how do we allocate it. And a lot of business owners, if you ask a business owner, like, what's the best investment you can make? They're going to typically say the business, right? Mm-hmm. Reinvesting back into the business, understanding what type of employee benefits, insurances, retirement plans are available to attract and retain talent.
I'm getting the sense that is that not what they should be saying as the answer?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of times that's what they should be looking for, right? They should, understand that the people are a really important asset. And so make sure you're building a team around yourself. Make sure you're going into business with a partner that you're going to be in it for quite some time. I think sometimes we look at the, not necessarily politics, but the challenges of being a business owner. And most of the time when people have partners, there can be things that can come up that make it difficult. So let's talk about things like buy-sell planning. Let's talk about walk-away provisions. Let's talk about how do we want to protect our business, grow our business, and eventually exit, right? Because every business owner is going to exit their business eventually. They're either going to sell it to insiders, sell it to outsiders, or stay there until they pass away. And so having those kind of things communicated up front, I think is a really good preventative measure to avoid discomfort down the road, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And it actually, I'm going to kind of jump into a question that I was thinking about for these individuals that are doing the clinical research, that are opening centers and practices like this, whether it's virtually or it's a brick and mortar. You talk about exit strategies, long-term strategy for success, being mindful of the cash flow and building the right team around you as you're building and opening these practices and centers. What about investors? Whether it's philanthropic investing into a center or whether it is direct investing and wanting to see an ROI, what should individuals, doctors, nurses that are opening these centers or becoming partners and working in part with these centers, what questions should they be asking? What should they be looking for when it comes to partnering with an investor that wants to help the cash flow, that wants to kind of come in and actually help elevate what the practice is doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the first things is to have a clear and developed mission statement. Like, what are you going into business for? Who are you trying to help and serve? Because I think there needs to be strong alignment between you as the center owner or someone who's opening it versus potential investors. So develop that clear mission statement, have that detailed business plan. You want to build a strong board of directors around you, because then as an entrepreneur, you can't do everything. You need to have a team. But then the other question is, as a clinician or a practitioner, you have to decide, are you going to work on the business or work in the business, or both? I have a client I'm thinking of, they're not only seeing patients, but they're also building the business, right? And 30 to 40% of the business's revenue comes from the partners as clinicians. You eventually have to scale effectively, you need cash flow and capital to hire a team to help take some of that load off so you can continue to work on the business. Also, timetable. If we're opening up a center, is it to make that your full-time career? Right? Is it to do kind of passive investing on the side? Is it a short-term mission statement? So a lot of these things have to be understood, I think, before you go looking for money, for example. Yeah, those are a couple things that come to mind on that.
It's a great strategy to have in mind, and I can see where it's important from both an investor's perspective and from a clinical perspective, what the goals and the mission should be when you're opening a center, whether it's something that's on the side, whether it's for clinical research, which, a lot of the centers that I've worked with, their primary drive is for clinical research and to really see if they can help navigate new therapies and new drugs within the space, or technology, even if it's bringing in technology and training of nurses and other doctors to be in that particular space. So I can see where this would be an important driver for both investor and practitioner.
And the last thing, find mentors in this space, right? People who were preceptors, mentors, and there's a lot of networking that we do on LinkedIn. So there's a lot of people out there in this medical professional community that want to be a resource. I just can't speak highly enough how important that professional networking is.
It's extremely important. Dan, I want to hop over to you for a second. If you have anything that you would love to add to what Frank was just saying, that would be great. But I also want to talk to you a little bit about estate planning.
So I'll add a couple quick things and then we can dive right into that. The only thing I really wanted to add is we see this every single day. Somebody that has countless years of experience, whether that's schooling for some sort of medical career, maybe they went to all sorts of med schools and so on from countless years, and now they're practicing in that world. What ends up happening is they're so good at that specific thing. But now, like Frank was just saying, they're going to start a business, which are you going to be exactly what you just learned, or are you now going to be something you don't really know too much about? Do you have the right counterparts, the right people that have been there before to really catapult that business to the next level? Because if maybe you don't have the right pieces around you, I would probably go look for something that aligns with your own mission. Like there already is a great company that does X, Y, and Z. Maybe trying to get involved with them, learning from them, learning the business more in depth, and then maybe taking a leap a little bit later down the road into some of those areas. But if something's going really, really well, maybe you can add a lot of value to what's already working instead of trying to start over on your own in different ways. So I do see some leaps without maybe not the right allies in their world or partners or direction, et cetera.
That's interesting because it is something where not everybody can be great at everything all of the time. And so sometimes when you get outside of your lane, maybe you are an amazing neurologist or neuro-oncologist.
Sure.
But does that mean that you're also an amazing business owner? And so it does beg the question, it makes you wonder, and have to ask that question. Can I navigate opening a business that focuses on this while I have my day-to-day practice over here? Can I be just as good as it? Or do I surround myself with people that are going to help elevate the mission and the work that we want to do over here, and then bring in the right investors? And do I learn about this first? So I think that that's a really great point, because I've come across many people, myself included, at times where you're like, oh yeah, I can do that. And you're like, well, hang on a second.
Sure.
I'm really good at this, but does that mean I'm going to be good at this as well? So I think that that's a great point to bring up.
Absolutely. And you mentioned estate planning. Is there something specific you wanted to dive into, or you want to just give me to give like a 101?
I definitely want to talk about estate planning specifically, and this is for anybody who's looking at doing estate planning, especially ahead of time. So, I think my two biggest questions would be, why should somebody focus on estate planning before they need to even worry about it? Number one.
Sure.
Number two, for those who have lost their spouse, whether a widow or a widower, but I tend to trend towards widows more often just because, and I could be wrong, but a lot of times women are going through needing, they're getting the life insurance, where vice versa, when it's a widower, usually they had the life insurance, not the wife. That could absolutely not be completely accurate all the time. But
yeah.
But for a lot of people, they have to think about things so differently the minute their spouse dies. Then it becomes paying off the medical bills, taking care of the finances solo. So what should individuals who have lost their spouse, what should they be thinking about? How should they be planning? They get this, in some cases, this huge life insurance check all of a sudden, and sometimes don't even know what to do with it. Don't know the questions to ask, don't know who to turn to. They may turn to the wrong financial planner or the wrong person to help them with that. So what should be the best way to navigate that circumstance, especially after losing their spouse's income, because now everything is on them. So help us walk through that.
Let's start with like that scenario, and then let's almost take a couple steps back just to like pre-planning and some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Actually, Shannon, I think it would be helpful to maybe very quickly hearing like your experience in the financial world with everything that happened in your world would shine some light on like what we're talking about a little bit more today too.
Sure.
So spouse passes, and now you're sitting there on so many different levels, emotional and financial pictures and ruins, and everything in your life is crumbling, and you can barely even breathe. And it's one of the worst times you're ever going to go through. And now you have people trying to take your money, and you're trying to figure out what to do with it. It's actually like got to be one of the worst feelings I'm sure someone can go through in general. And Shannon can maybe speak a little bit more to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, now what?
Yes.
I will say that like if the spouse doesn't, the one that passed doesn't had any life insurance, and you're just sitting with the situation, and now you accumulated their debt and all this other stuff. The first thing, hopefully you have somebody in your world that you like and trust and has some idea of what's going on with your financial world. But let's just say you don't.
Mm-hmm.
What it really comes down to is like, who can you go to like understand your picture, to then guide in the situation you're in step by step on the way up. If you can understand what's going to be coming to you, what's not, how all those pieces work. And that's sometimes why a lot of this planning should be done beforehand, because it makes at least financially feel a little bit better and the organization of everything a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not always the case.
If somebody is trying to navigate this, what questions should they think about asking the financial advisors that they're sitting down with? What should they be looking for in a financial advisor when they're first meeting with somebody? Because you can't always just go on gut instinct when it comes to who you're going to work with, because you're talking about your future, and you're talking about, in some cases, large chunks of money. Whether stuff has been set up ahead of time, or life insurance was just set up because it was through somebody's work and you're not thinking about it. And now all of a sudden you're faced with needing to do something with this. When you're sitting down with individuals, I can let everybody know that after Mike died, so Mike had life insurance. I did not through my work. Mike did. It was something that when he started at his company years and years and years ago, it was, oh yeah, we're going to do the life insurance thing. It was a very quick 2-second conversation. Yeah, you're going to be my beneficiary. Okay. I don't want to have this conversation. We're too young. That kind of thing.
Sure.
So, yep. I'm going to fill out the paperwork. This is what it is. And there you go. And you don't even think about it again. Because of our ages, and I will tell everybody, as uncomfortable as it is, put a will together, do your healthcare proxy, have an executor, set that stuff up early. You may think it's an uncomfortable situation. And when you're in your late 20s, your 30s, your mid 30s, you may think you've got plenty of time and you don't want to have to deal with this.
Sure.
But life happens. And I think for all of those listening, everybody out there knows that it doesn't matter how old you are. Stuff happens. When Mike died, his life insurance, I was the beneficiary of his life insurance. I had people, because of the work that I do, my story was in the local newspaper. We were doing media. I had started the podcast, and people just all of a sudden came out of the woodwork. People that were saying they were financial advisors, and I'm putting this in air quotes, that were all of a sudden just on LinkedIn and just reaching out to me, and we can help you with this. And absolutely. And I was starting to take meetings because I wasn't sure what I was going to do and how I was going to best protect my financial future, especially with him being gone. And he was the primary breadwinner. I mean, we both had full-time jobs. We both made decent money, but he made significantly more than I did at the time. Here I was taking on, I had to pay off all the medical bills. I had to keep up with the mortgage, property taxes, the day-to-day.
Sure.
And take care of myself. But at the same time, I didn't want to just burn through all of the life insurance money. I didn't want that to become my crutch and burn through it.
Yeah.
And it took a lot of meetings. I didn't even know what a fiduciary meant until I went through this. And that was why I posed that question earlier, because I feel that is such an important thing to know.
Yeah.
I didn't know the questions to ask right away until I started meeting with a few financial advisors. And then I was fortunate enough through a family member to get introduced to some financial advisors. It's a very small kind of family-run, owned and operated company who has done very well. They're fiduciaries. And the first thing they said to me was, this is your lifeline. This is your future. The last thing we want to do is put you in a place where you're not going to be better off 10 years from now, 15, 20 years from now. And the minute they said, they were the first ones to sit there and say, we need to protect your future because of what's happened to you.
Yeah.
And the minute they said that, I was like, these are the only people that have done that. These are the only people that have said, we understand what this money means. We understand the significance of you needing to be careful. I was fortunate enough to find a group that I loved, and you guys operate much the same way.
Sure.
This is why it's important to be thinking about these things. So, when we share a little bit about my story, that's kind of where we're coming from with this.
Yeah.
So what should widows and widowers, what should they be thinking about, when it comes to, do they take some of that life insurance out to pay things off? Should they invest some of it? What are some really good options for them to be considering? And then let's back that into, why consider estate planning before anything even happens?
Shannon, one, thank you for sharing that. I think that definitely draws in the impact and the situation you were in, and can resonate, I'm sure, with people going through this. So really appreciate that. So the first question you asked was like questions to think about. I'm just going to give a couple quick ones, then I can dive into the part 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Things to think about. I think the first one is like, if you're getting introduced to an advisor, like who else in your world that has a similar situation has worked with them? Can you get a testimonial from people you know, like, and trust, or many people that can kind of resonate with you in different ways?
Mm-hmm.
You could also ask the advisor, hey, like I'm 40 and I'm a widow. Who else have you worked with like me? And try to have them introduce you to multiple people, because you want to work with somebody who works with people like you.
Mm-hmm.
If you come to me and you're like this really profound doctor who's doing all these other things, and I'm like, I don't even know what you're like the language you're speaking, because I don't work with that many doctors, but Frank and his team does.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would be like, hey, go work with Frank and them. Sorry, I'm not going to be the best fit.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we want to be very clear. You want to work with somebody who works with people like yourself. So that's like the first thing I would do is ask for testimonials. I would try to read about, like, are they working with a bunch of 35-year-olds? Are they working with a bunch of people that are retiring? Are they only working with just assets? Are they working with everything? Like, how does the picture look? After that, I would start to ask things like fiduciary, or you guys are fiduciary, explain to me how you work with clients. Talk to me more about how your process works, how your fees work, understanding the fee structure and like where they're getting compensated. Is it like for products?
Mm-hmm.
Is it for the assets you move over? Is it for advice? All work a little bit differently. We can go in a little bit deeper in that area a different time. And then the last thing you can kind of feel in your gut, are they BSing you or are they giving you serious empathy like you just explained in your story, Shannon? Like, like we care. Holy crap. Let's take a time out here and just sit through like what's going on in your world. Is that like BS or do you feel that in your stomach like they actually are listening to you? They actually know your picture. They can actually give you true advice. And if you don't go through those boxes, I wouldn't work with them.
Interesting. Okay.
Of course, Frank and myself work with a lot of great people. And we, of course, would love to talk to you before all this stuff happens naturally. But at the end of the day, life happens. And that's usually what causes the conversation to come up.
Right.
After a big change, after a big purchase or death or certain things, all of those trigger us becoming more and more important in their world. And unfortunately, like pre that stuff, we don't get like people don't get that kick in the butt until something hits them.
And this is why we're having this conversation, right? I mean, this is why we're talking about these things from so many different perspectives to give people that information, to have them maybe thinking of these things ahead of time, even if it's something that they don't utilize right away. Let's jump into the nonprofit aspect of this, because a lot of people, spouses, partners, people in my world have gone on to start nonprofits or 501c3s so that they can kind of contribute to or help find purpose in what they've been dealing with. So when it comes to starting a 501c3, what's the most important thing to know about starting a 501c3 and what should people consider? You know, what questions should they be asking as they're building a nonprofit from a financial perspective? I'm
going to almost take the words out of Frank's mouth from earlier. If you don't spend a massive amount of time building core values and vision and really, really, really aligning with exactly what you want to do and what impact you want to make and having almost like a framework for everybody you're going to hire and the people that you're going to interact with and serve and so on, that would be like pre-step one. And then you can decide like this going into a 501c3 or some sort of business or all the other options you might have, you can start to align with that. But the first thing I would always do is understand that entire picture, because that helps hire, that helps grow that. Because if you create that, you stay in alignment with that, with all the other decisions. It makes decision making a little bit easier because now you have a guideline to make the decision. Now you have exactly what the framework of all of it is. That's the first thing I would start with. And then the second thing I would start to dive into, if a 501c3 is the choice that you make, is there a way to partner with an already successful one, like I said a little bit earlier, that you can align really well and bring resources to and maybe become a key player. And now all of a sudden you triple an already well successful, great mission nonprofit? Or is that not really an option and you want to do it yourself because you're going in a different direction or you want to make a different type of impact? Those would be some of the starting things, because a lot of people are like, oh, wow, it's a new idea.
Right. I'm
going to go run with that. And let's be honest, a lot of these ideas are been thinking of, and they might already be in action. So it could totally be a brand new idea and you could be running with an awesome thing going, but just know that sometimes it's already maybe being done and maybe you can catapult what's already being done to the next level.
So when somebody's thinking about a nonprofit, should they be considering what revenue? So I was told once by a completely different group that, you know, you really should have about $1 million to play with to start a nonprofit. Should somebody who's thinking of starting, is that something that they really need to have some cash reserve set aside in order to form their nonprofit, whether it's short-term or long-term? Or is that something that they can build up through the fundraising and through working with sponsors and partners because they're a 501c3?
I've heard that too.
Yeah.
I will say that is great if you're planning on growing really fast and like really having the reserves to get to the place where you want to be. Of course, a good chunk of capital to start always is helpful if you use it properly. I would say that might be a little high. It just depends on the act. Like if the cause you want to have is like just Buffalo impact on something specific, and you really only need a couple $100,000 a year to really make that big of an impact on that certain thing. That might be a little bit different. But two things I see in 501c3s that I would love to see it be a little bit stronger is it still should be ran like a successful business, even though it's not utilizing profits to put it in people's pocket. It's still utilizing that money to go out in the community and serve. So you still have to do a really good job with it.
Right. You
still have a payroll because you're paying people that are helping. You still have some of those basic business things. So a lot of people they have this big heart and they want to go do this great thing. And I think it's amazing, but just know that if you run it properly, you can make a bigger impact.
That's interesting.
So mismanaging of money, mismanaging of the business side of the 501c3,
Right.
we want to make sure that we're in alignment with like doing the right stuff in that area. Because if you're kicking butt, guess what? You're making more of an impact because of it. You're able to hire more, get more impact, more marketing out in the community, more things like that.
You're driving your mission.
Frank, did you want to add something to that, man?
All awesome stuff, Dan. And I think two things to add. One is I think there's a difference between cash on hand and cash flow. So like there can be a magic number of $1 million, 800,000, but it's hard to I think pinpoint that number. So I think that's why cash flow is most important.
Okay.
And one of the things from a nonprofit standpoint, and sidebar, in a previous life, I got my master's in public administration and did some work in that space. We don't want to overlook the importance of grants, federal grants, state and local grants, private foundation grants.
Very true.
So if you're thinking about, incorporating as a 501c3, looking for money, sure, you can get it from revenue generating activities, but have someone on your team or self-learn who knows how to navigate the grant world. There's a lot of money out there. You just have to do the application the right way, and you have to find the right players. But I just want to make a comment on that.
No, I think that's a great point to bring up, and I think everybody forgets about the fact that there are grants out there and that there is money out there to be had, whether from an investor standpoint, whether it's philanthropic, whether it's from a grant perspective. But knowing how to write grants is definitely key, and having the right people around you that can help you navigate those. It's a great point to bring up. I'm going to throw this out to either one of you. Either one of you can jump in and answer, but whether we're talking about an individual who wants to start a 501c3 and their late spouse is on her, or they're navigating the significant loss and now are trying to kind of build their financial future, to build out success for themselves financially and to stabilize, can individuals invest for their future while also having some monthly income or dividends, let's say, that come in from what they invest, to help them during a time of crisis or to help them stabilize after the loss of a spouse?
I think the short answer is absolutely. The first thing is, when building out investment plans for clients, first thing we do is you have to consider the time horizon. Some people may have cash and they want to do some sort of investment with it to turn into, like you said, passive income or dividends or whatnot. You have to look at the time horizon. When is the soonest that they're going to need some of that money? There may be a percentage of your overall investment plan that you won't touch for 20 years, but there may be another percent that you need in 20 weeks. So like the investment strategy truly needs to be different for those situations. Many times, I don't want to speak for Dan, but many times I'll see clients come in for the first time and they may have cookie cutter type plans or target date plans, and it's not really taking into consideration their personal goals and concerns. So I think having a meaningful conversation around time horizon is really important. I don't know, Dan, if you want to add anything to that, but that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
I'm going to take an entire different angle at that question, because in the context of like estate planning and in the context of losing a spouse and so on, I'm going to talk about like some of the things you should consider from a protection standpoint or risk management standpoint.
Okay.
There's multiple domains in that world. A couple of the big ones, just for you guys as viewers, is life insurance, disability insurance, things like home and auto and like umbrella policies, and estate documents like wills, trusts, power of attorneys, things like that. Very, very quick overview. Life insurance, the minimum life insurance that a company would give you, a life insurance company would give you, is a very basic calculation. A lot of people do this like crazy, like how much is your house plus this, plus all this other stuff. Let's keep it simple. If you're in your 20s and your 30s, you can get 30x your income. So if you make $100,000 and you're 35, you can get $3 million of coverage if you can qualify medically and you can show that financials. That's like right now.
Okay.
If you're in your 40s, it's 20x. So if you make $100,000 and you're in your 40s, it's $2 million. And if you're in your 50s, it's about 10x. So if you're making $100,000 in your 50s, it's about $1 million. And then 60s plus could be anywhere from 1 times net worth or 5 times income. There's more calculations and as you get a little bit older in the 60s plus range.
Okay.
That being said, if you're sitting here and you're listening to this and you're 35 years old, you make $100,000, any insurance company without a blink at a minimum would give you that $3 million number. So just remember, if you have 100,000 through work and you can get 3 million, that you have a massive gap, and that 100,000 will get eaten pretty quickly if you have to potentially use that to pay off unwanted debt or burial expenses or anything like that. We
Right.
want to make sure we're getting closer to that economic value they call it, or human life value, which is that calculation I just gave you guys real quick.
That's interesting to keep in mind. You bring up, an extra point that we haven't talked about a whole lot, burial expenses, which are not cheap. That can come into financial planning. I don't think people realize when they're talking about funeral expenses, especially when you're in your 30s and 40s, it is extremely, Mike's funeral was almost the amount of our wedding. Like
Wow.
the funeral expenses were exorbitant. And there were extra factors that we had to consider at the time because it was still in the middle of the pandemic. So we had to pay extra for a live stream for family members and relatives that couldn't be in person. All of these little nuances and things that you have to consider and think about. It does play into what's going to be best for. And you guys both mentioned that the financial advisor, it's interesting, when you sit down and you meet with somebody, they should be asking the questions for you that you don't even know to ask.
Definitely.
And I think that that's vital to stress because, they should be mindful of the things that you don't even know, that you're not even sure what to look for. They should be on top of that for you before you even realize that that was something you should be thinking about.
Yeah, and I think one thing to add to what Dan was saying is when we think about financial planning, it involves many different variables, some of which we've already said, right? Everything from rising cost of living, economic fluctuations, years left to work, tax rates. I can go on and on and on. But the only two things that we can control is protection and cash flow. And so, from a protection standpoint, Dan mentioned, a couple of different types of insurances and benefits out there. And I heard someone once say that when we look at life insurance, for example, in the realm of estate planning, it's so easy to get right. It's not worth getting wrong. And when he says it's easy to get right, based on your income and how old you are. And so when we have conversations with younger clients in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, like you mentioned earlier, Shannon, it's hard to paint a picture of a situation when you need, some money for time your significant other passes away or whatnot. So I always like to, at least in my practice, I always like to tell clients the two things that we can control today is protection. Do insurance applications. We can look at your employee benefits. We can get a will done pretty free or inexpensive in certain places. And then the cash flow is more of the savings, understanding what they make, what their expenses and bills are. But yeah, no, I think that's the key point to understand what we can control because it can sometimes be overwhelming with all the different noise out there from a financial standpoint.
I like how you've distilled that down. I do think that that's really important. And it takes away all the noise because sometimes there's so much noise when you're trying to go through all this stuff. It's like being in the weeds. It's like being in a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids kind of scenario where all of a sudden the grass is much taller than you are.
And you said it perfectly though too about questions. If I were to talk to any other financial advisor who said, hey, Frank, like what's the tip to success of being a good financial advisor? It's to be curious and ask questions and tell me more, explain to me, describe. Because if you're not taking that due diligence, you're not being a fiduciary. You're not doing good service. And you mentioned earlier your journey about not having an advisor, but you said that you kind of went around and interviewed people. And I think that's a really great takeaway is if you don't have an advisor before something happens, go interview, go make sure they're looking out for your best interest and they're asking those questions. So being curious, I think, is really important from our standpoint.
It's safe to say, and I have talked with Frank and Dan and their counterpart Landon as well a number of times. And the one thing that I can stress to everybody is that you guys are so mindful of how you can best help. I've said this before when it comes to the medical community, when it comes to caregiving and patient access, who they're meeting with, you're building a team, whether it's financially, medically, personally, you're building out a team and you want these team members to have your best interests at heart. You don't have to go with the first person that reaches out to you just because they say they're the expert. You have to interview, you have to do your homework, you have to do your research. It's just like going on a job interview. You're not going to just walk in the door and assume you know the company just by the look of the place or something one person said to you. You have to do your due diligence and find the best fit. That's something that you guys seem to take very, very seriously.
Absolutely. I have a rule, Shannon. I actually tell my clients this. Some people would be like, you're crazy for doing this. But I tell all my clients to interview at least 3 advisors before they decide to choose us.
Really?
I look at it this way. If we sit down, I'm going to learn a lot about you. We're going to ask a lot of questions. We're going to literally have like pages of notes and start to fill out our whole entire system. And it's going to be a great conversation. But also, you're going to ask us questions. We're going to get into the weeds of how we work with this and what we think we could do and how we're a great fit and all that good stuff. And at the end of that conversation, you're going to feel either amazing that we're the right fit. It's a win-win situation. We're going to feel amazing like it's a win-win situation. And we're going to move forward and like kick butt together. And if it doesn't feel fully like that because of fees, because of maybe I couldn't speak the language or I was speaking at a different terminology or whatever it was and we couldn't relate, then I would not move forward with that person. I would go interview 2 other ones at least and get that feeling like, is this the person who I want to work with for the next 10, 20, 30 years and their team, and like trust in them. And that's why I always say, usually they'll like have a couple conversations. Then by the time they meet with me, they're already ready to move forward with us.
Right.
But that being said, I still want them to have a actual experience with other people in this field to get a feel for like we're the absolute best in this, or maybe there's somebody that they would rather work with because of their situation, etc.
That's really impressive. I don't know too many people in the industry that would say the same thing. Not even from, a neurology standpoint. So I think we need to be doing more of that on a whole from a multitude of different practices. This kind of aligns with the work so Alliance Advisory as a whole is very community driven, but you guys individually have also done a lot out in the community. Can you talk to us a little bit about what kinds of community events you guys have gotten involved with and why you feel it's so important to be involved in the community that you serve?
I guess, Alliance Advisory Group, been in the Buffalo region since 1979, but they give all of their different advisors kind of autonomy to really run their practice, right? That's kind of why I'm a specialist in the medical space. For me, some of the 2 organizations that I'm involved in pretty regularly, done a lot of work with the Trauma Survivors Network. It's an organization that helps connect clinicians, nurses with the patients and the family members of patients, and just bringing together that community so they can interact with each other. And so done some work with Trauma Survivors Network. Also, I am a fundraising director for my local Rotary. So I'm a big Rotarian over here in Rochester.
Yep.
Yeah. Rock City Rotary, little shout out there. And, I think giving back isn't, a requirement to work at Alliance Advisory Group, but, we certainly encourage it. As a financial advisor, you should be a part of your community. I don't do these types of things to get clients. I do these types of things because I have the freedom in my business to have time to go do these, right? And to network and try to impact my community. But those are some of the things that I do.
Dan, what about you? Because you're out here in the Buffalo region.
I don't know if it was just how I was brought up. My parents are very involved in the community and things like on the Jewish Family Service Board. My father's on right now. My sister sits on many boards and my mom's very involved as well. And I think maybe just because I was around some of that stuff and I always wanted to give back, that I stayed pretty involved as well. So I've been involved in the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation for about 5 years. I was in the Rising Stars class of 2019. We raised over $100,000 for cystic fibrosis.
Wow.
Cystic fibrosis doesn't have any government funding, so it's actually all raised by the foundation, which is incredible. And 95% of that money went right to this community, which is incredible. The Western New York community, like right off the bat. Been on committees and boards for that foundation for a while. I just sponsored, with Alliance Advisor Group's name, this actually really, really well done, really cool suicide prevention event, which was at Deep South Taco a couple weeks back. There was hundreds of people there creating massive amounts of awareness. I know there was tens of thousands of dollars being donated. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, Frank, myself, and a lot of the people on our teams, people we work with, just like have big hearts. And we love giving our resources and our time back to the community. And at the end of the day, I always, and I teach trainings on this all the time, if you get into like something for the right reasons, because you care about it, you love it and so on, you'll always fill that cup and you'll always feel really, really awesome about it. And if some odd reason down the road, you build some great relationship and that there's business that's being done, that's great. But never go into anything for that reason. Go into it because you love it, you care about it, and you want to make an impact.
I don't even know if there's anything else to say because it's such a great point to end on. I think that's why we all get involved in what we do. And I think what both of you have said stresses so many key and critical points to the communities that we serve, the work we do out in the communities, the people that we try to help. And at the end of the day, the work that I do, the work that you guys do, it's all about helping people. It's all about creating a platform, creating a foundation, advocating and educating. And allowing people to feel stable and not feel alone in whatever journey that they're on, even if it's venturing out to start, a business in the medical space, or an individual that's navigating financial planning and risk management. It's crucial to make sure that we remember that we're not alone. We have a team by our side. We have people that care. We're out in the community because we want to be. And I can't thank you guys enough. I think that this information, and we're going to have these guys on again. So for all of our listeners, don't worry. There's so much more that we can dive into, but we only have so much time in an episode. So you can only get into the nitty gritty of these topics. But we will absolutely have these guys on again and really diving into some more important aspects of what it really truly means to be financially stable in your own lives and, in just living, and the questions to be asking. So I want to thank you guys both so much for being on, for joining us, for giving us such crucial information. Where can people find you? If people have questions, if they want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
One thing I'll add quick is everything we touched on, me and Frank do video content. We do posts a lot. We do constant events and workshops and so on, whether those are webinars or they're in person in Buffalo and Rochester. So when you follow us on our LinkedIn's, Facebook business pages, our websites, you'll start to see some of that stuff too. So if you liked what we talked about, you can just hear more, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
As far as reaching me, easiest way to do that is my business work phone, which is 716-913-3013.
Okay.
Other easy way to reach me is look my name up and go on LinkedIn or Facebook business and shoot over that. You can follow everything we're doing and we can connect pretty easily there. My name is Daniel Schlein, last name spelled Schlein.
Great.
Yeah, and just like Dan said, Dan and I are both pretty active on LinkedIn, so appreciate following any engagement or comments on LinkedIn. Let us know what the community wants. That's super helpful. And for me, you can find more information on what I do for individual medical professionals and practice owners at medprofinancials.com. So it's got an S at the end. You can book time with me right there. I put a lot of complimentary educational content on my website just to kind of give people a high-level overview, kind of what we talked about today. So medprofinancials.com, or find me on LinkedIn.
Thank you guys so much for joining us, for sharing this information. For everybody that's listening, I will have some of the video content, and any hyperlinks will be directly on our website under their bios. And please be aware too that we also have their bio information in our resource section. So if any of you have any questions, you can always go there to find these individuals and to look them up and to ask whatever questions you want. We will have information on LinkedIn as well. Thank you guys so much for sharing this information, for being a resource and an insight into what can be a very muddy topic at times. And for everybody that's listening, we will be right back. This episode was brought to you by Imvax LLC, developing immunotherapeutic vaccines and therapies for treatment of cancers such as glioblastoma. Learn more at imvax.com. You've been listening to the Game on Glio podcast, the podcast that is designed to educate, advocate, and tell the real stories of those walking the journey of brain cancers such as glioblastoma and grief and loss. Like what you hear? Share us with others. Follow us on Instagram at Game on Glio Podcast, Facebook at Game on Glio, or visit our website or YouTube channel. You can find us anywhere podcasts are played.